everyone. I am working on a memorial quilt for my aunt out of my uncle's clothing. They both loved flowers and she wanted some sort of flower quilt made out of his clothing. So she said, just surprise me. So that's where I came up with the surprise flower. So this is the block that I'm going to be creating. And this is the process how I came up with it. So I had made a prairie flower quilt block for another aunt and uncle for their bed. And this is the petal part of a prairie flower quilt block. And when I sewed it, it cut off the point, which I'm totally okay with that because that's part of the flower. And not a lot of flowers are pointy. Anyway, so the very first block I came up with is this one. So I was like, maybe I shouldn't cut off the points. So I made a bigger triangle on these two corners so that when I would sew them to either sashing strips or another block, that point wouldn't get cut off. But I kind of sat with it a little bit and it just wasn't hitting me. I wanted the flower to look like it's spinning, even though flowers don't spin. But I'm just like, I don't know. It gave it movement and I like that aspect of it. So then I thought, well, I'll just lower the square size here. And then I came up with this one where I did a 2.5 inch square on that snowballed corner. And this one was good. It was kind of like the same prairie flower petal, but it still wasn't hitting me. And then I was like, you know what? I'm just basically looking to round off the flower petal. And so that's where I came up with this one. So I wanted to talk to you real quick about what you're seeing here with these blocks. Whenever I start a project, whether it is from something that I have seen either in a book or on YouTube or somewhere, and I'm like creating that pattern in my head, because I am not a good pattern reader. I can do it, but it just takes me so much longer. Like I just think too much about it. So I'm more of a visual learner. And so what I like to do is I go into my scrap bins and I pull out what I think I'm going to need for making that. And then I make a sample block out of just scrap fabric. A lot of these fabrics I don't like. I don't know that if I would put them in a quilt. They could always be used in a quilt because all fabric is beautiful, right? Am I right? I'm right. So anyway, what I do is I find what I need to make that quilt block and I experiment with it. We all have different 1/4 inch seams. We all have different feet, threads, fabric. You have to find what works for you. And so I suggest if you have some spare fabric that you would like to make, you know, into before you get into a project, before you cut up all that fabric and then you go to work on it and you're like, I'm not liking it. Especially when you're dealing with memorial fabric because they aren't making any more fabric. And so you have to be really careful with what you're doing because you have a limited number of material. So I highly suggest to do this for any project you're working on, whether it be a memorial quilt or a regular quilt. Here is another thing, is that after you make that quilt, you're like, wow, I really like that quilt. I like how it turned out. Or maybe you have someone that's like, boy, I want a quilt like that. And then you can go back and look at your notes, but here is a great quick way to be like, okay, I know what works here, and here are my notes. So for each one of these, I have little notes on it. So for the prairie flower, I just wrote it on a piece of paper, and I did a safety pin on here, and then I hang it. I have a little thing over here where I can hang things. And so that works really well. So it's like, I know if I'm going to make that again, I have all my notes right here. Other things I do is, especially like this one, as I'm making it, as I go along. I am writing right on the fabric with a marker or a pen, whatever works for you, that this started off as a 6-inch square. And then I used a 3.5-inch square that I snowballed this corner. It's a 3.5-inch. And then each middle piece is a 2-inch. Okay. So this just works really well, because even though I'm not making this block today, I may in the future. I may want to be like, you know what? I want to make this in the future. And then I already have it done. Same way goes for this one. So I'm going to keep all these together because, like I said, I'm calling them a surprise flower. And so I may want to make that in the future. So I will keep all these together. I'll put a safety pin through it. I have, you know, just to keep that pattern together. And then I already have my measurements for what I need to cut for these. Now, as far as how many you need to do, that depends on the size of quilt that you're making. So I know the size that I'm making for my aunt. So, but you can just go through and figure out how many blocks you need for however wide and tall you need. So I hope this helps on this aspect, and let's continue on with the making of this surprise flower quilt.